Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for, and they, again, probably didn't. As always, I'm AJ, and sitting across from me, Jason. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing good, AJ, and I agree with you. Probably didn't because I wasn't prepared, but we stumbled through it, so we're going to get everybody else through it.
I figured it out on my own. Well, I say I figured. Yeah. I don't think I ever figured it out. I just kind of made my way through it.
Now you've been sick this week, right?
Man, this past weekend, we're actually recording this later in the week than we normally would because I still sound rough. I still sound like I'm smoking a pack of Marlboros every day, but I'm coming off of it hopefully. So it's been a rough weekend. How about you? How was your weekend?
Oh, it was good. It was good. The weekend for me is not a restful time. It is a time when I hope where I can get some stuff done, and I actually did get some stuff done this weekend, so that feels good, But yeah, most weekends they end up being frustrating because they end up getting nothing done, and then it's not, you go into a week feeling like you're behind and blah blah blah. So, of course, you're in the same boat. You're doing your schoolwork during the weekend, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing it during the week and the weekend, so I'm trying to get as much as I can done in my weekly stuff early in the week, and then the rest of the week I'm just spending on reading articles and dissertation stuff, trying to catalog stuff. So, trying to get the prep work done for that. It's getting more and more intense. So.
Well, you're taking our own advice, right? You're preparing hard, you're setting your checklist, your deadline, expectations, all that kind of stuff. So at least you have a plan.
No, yeah, right? I've got a plan. I'm sticking to it. I'm doing something that I normally would not do, and that's the whole catalog thing. It's something that, again, it's those tips that we gave, prepare early, it'll make the rest of the journey kind of smoother. I'm doing that instead of just kind of doing it piecemealing. So we'll see how it goes. It's a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So I have to keep telling myself that. Today's episode, it's a special episode because we're starting a new series. This one's a very interesting one. This is one that we've waited till kind of towards the end of our log of stuff that we're going to be talking about to do this, because this is a special one, because it's not holistically about the students, which is pretty much everything that we've talked about today. This one has obviously a major part of the students is involved in it, but we're also looking at the parents. So we're looking at the parent-student dynamic when it comes to college. And more specifically in this episode, we're going to be talking about academic expectations of parents and that dynamic between the parents' expectations and the students. So what do you think about that?
Great idea. I mean, things have changed a little bit, right? I mean, now going to college is not just a young adult's undertaking. Now it's a whole family undertaking. So, yeah, we need to expand our audience, as they say. But that being said, before we do, just remind everybody, hit us up on the website. That's where you're going to find all our episodes, all the things we've gone over in the past, topics. You can search, things that are relevant to you that we've talked about in the past. I mean, we've had 90 episodes. Can you believe that?
We're getting there, man. It's coming up on,
of course,
3-digit one. Oh,
yeah. And of course, as always, you got to hit us up on the social media and things like that, because, we appreciate you liking us on the podcasting app, sharing that as well, because that's going to get the word out about us as well. But anyway, that's it. That's all I got to tell people.
Sweet. Well, quick question of the day. And again, this is more that personal one that we always start with. And part of this we've already talked about. It's actually kind of almost like a 3-parter question. But 1, did your parents have expectations for you during college? And then 2, rate those expectations. And then 3, when did you actually realize those expectations?
So, good question. And I think you and I are, based upon what we know about each other, are going to be on the opposite ends of this spectrum, right?
Oh, yeah.
So my parents had well wishes for me in college. They hoped
I love that, well wishes.
But they had no expectations. They did have, well, let me say that again. They had expectations of me as a person that I would work hard and try. But as far as my performance in college and things of that nature, they left that up to me. They knew at that point they hopefully had raised a relatively responsible person who would handle their own affairs, right? Who would try, put in that diligent effort in college, and hopefully have a satisfactory result. They wanted me to pass. They wanted me to get a degree. But again, that was on me, right? I mean, they weren't pushing me in that way, So I had a lot of leeway to do and be who I was going to be, that type of thing. So I don't know. What about you?
I was on the opposite end, to a degree. I would not say that mine were, to the extreme that I've heard or seen, from people that I've communicated with, but mine did have expectations of me, and those expectations really stemmed from high school moving into college, and the dynamic that I had with my parents and the dynamic that my parents had just together kind of led to those expectations. So my dad being from another country, and especially in that country, in the Middle East, education is so important. And then for him to come over and get his MBA and PhD over in the United States, he had to graduate top of his class in high school and top of his class in undergrad to get the scholarship to come over here because his family didn't have the money to send him over here. So he knew what could be done. He knew what needed to be done, and he knew what hard work would show, the outcome of hard work. And so he had higher expectations for me, fortunately, because he saw it in me. And interestingly enough, myself and my three brothers, we were all kind of different in the expectations. I mean, it was just different levels. But they saw us three as individuals instead of just, one, everybody's the same. And so mine tended to be fairly high. It was one of those things that is completely doable in every class, and I should have it. There was the occasional classes that they knew I struggled with deeply, which was the English literature kind of classes. I struggled with those. I struggled with those all through high school. So they were a little bit more lenient on that, but they also knew that, the outcome of the class was a reflection of what you put into the class. And if they didn't see that, then they understood why. And that's where kind of that expectation came from. So it wasn't necessarily the grade. It was just putting the effort into it, because they knew the grade would come if you put the effort into it. So, but that was my dad's side, because that's how he grew up. That was the culture over there. It's so important. My mom grew up, she grew up, she was born in South Georgia, but she moved every 6 months because her dad was a road construction worker. So in the winters, it'll be in Georgia, and the summers, they'd be in Michigan. And so moving back and forth, and college to them isn't a big deal. Nobody in their family went to college. It was just not something that was on the priority board. And so, she made it out of high school, and that was pretty much it. She's always said she married her college degree. And so there was this value on my dad's side of really high expectations of college, but there was this moderator in my mom who says, education, I understand education is really important, but there's also aspects of going through high school, going through college, where the experience is just as important, having fun, because you're gonna learn that. You're gonna learn things from that. So I had this really cool kind of mixture of education is super important, but so is experiencing life. And so they kind of gave me this freedom to say, you can experience life, go have fun, as long as you put a focus, a higher level of focus on your grades, on the outcome of your classes. And again, that all had to do with the fact that they knew what I wanted to do. So they knew what I had to have in terms of grades in order to achieve my goals. And so it was always that. I mean, it was always, I could pretty much do whatever I wanted to. I had the flexibility. We talked about this, last episode, the autonomy. I had complete autonomy to a degree, assuming my grades, my standards were where they needed to be. And and in terms of when did I realize this expectation? I mean, like I said, I realized it in high school. It was all the way back in high school. Really, it was you get your report card in high school, and it was, you get in trouble if you had a C or whatever, but it was really in the area during the time of, I believe it was my what would have been my junior year when we start driving. So I was 16 and I had that freedom to drive. And so obviously I had the freedom to get into more stuff, which took away from the studying. And so it was around that time where I realized, they're really giving me they're extending the leash. That's a bad analogy, but they're extending the leash in hopes that I will make the best decisions while I'm under their care, which is in high school. So that way I will know how to handle the situation when there is no leash in college, essentially no leash. But yeah, that was the expectations they always had, a B in, like I said, a B in certain classes was just not reasonable. It happened. I did screw up at times, but it was just not reasonable because they could always look back and go, you could have put more time in it. And then at the time I was like, no, I couldn't. I just didn't know it. But now looking at it, so many years later, we're not going to talk about how many years later, but looking back at it, I can go, yeah, I could have put more time in it. And especially now in this program where I'm going through this time period now where my expectations, I'm old enough. I'm my own person. My parents don't have expectations for me right now because I'm already in my professional career. They just want me to graduate. I'm putting more pressure on myself than they are at this time. So yeah, I had a very interesting dynamic, and I know this is not for everyone. And, people are not going to be in your same boat. People are not going to be in my same boat. Some people are going to be even more on the extremes on each side of the spectrum. But that's what we're kind of hoping to talk about here. Is how is that dynamic? How does it affect the relationship? How does it affect, experiences and stuff like that? So,
yeah. And everybody's situation is going to be just a little bit different in that regard. If we think about it, right, you're going through early education, middle school, high school, people start to become who they're going to become. We start to see the personality type form. Parents get involved. They have to, right? That's their job. And everybody has that. Even somebody who gets a lot of autonomy in college, later on, earlier on, your parents have some level of involvement. And of course, your parents have expectations of you, but it's kind of, I guess, the extent to which your parents feel ultimately responsible for who you become in life. And while every parent is interested and wants to say, hey, I want you to be the best person you can, I want you to have all the opportunities and things like that, exercising an extreme amount of control, it is the same thing that we talk about in terms of micromanaging, right? It can, for some kids, they need it more than others, but for most everybody, they rebel from it, right? So even if you are going to be highly involved, right, there's a degree function there, the extent to which you're going to let somebody be who they are. And to the extent you can't or weren't able to do that earlier on, it means at some point you're going to have to make that transition. So there's a wide spectrum there that we need to talk about. And there's a lot of scenarios that could come up that, that parents, everyone sees their situation as different, right? Every kid is going to say, well, my parents are this or that or the other. And every parent is going to say, well, my kid is this, that, or the other. And I just want this. And it's normally, I just want the best for the kid, right? Type scenario. So we can't say there's one that's right or wrong, but we can talk about the scenarios that can have positive or negative repercussions there. Right? Because they certainly can. And to the extent you can't stay hands off, or to the extent you aren't involved at all, right? Honestly, I would say that there has to be some level of happy medium in between the two. Otherwise, either extreme is going to meet with probably some level of friction or frustration or resentment by either one or both parties, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's my take on that.
Let's get into the main questions. And so, because the first question is kind of running right in what you just said. How can parents' expectations be valuable to students during college? And then how can they also be detrimental? Like, what times you have valuable and what times can they be detrimental?
You want to run down the valuable first?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind,
some of the valuables might be detrimental, though, right?
I'm going to try to stick with ones that are kind of exclusive just to valuable, because I'm looking at it when I look at. So let's break this question down. The way I'm reading this question, when we say how the parents' expectations can be valuable students, I'm looking at it in an optimal situation. So we're not looking at I'm not looking at the extremes where too much of something good can be bad. I'm looking at it just assuming the ideal amount of balance. Okay. And the first thing that comes to my mind is if done correctly. And I guess I should preface all of these with if done correctly. A parent's expectation, essentially, students obviously grew up in the parents' eyes. The parents followed the growth of the student from birth until the moment they hit college. And they hopefully understand the potential of the students. And those parents' expectations typically are going to be on par with what the student has the ability to achieve. So it's not, again, there's extremes to this, but it's not a matter of a parent saying, my student is a straight A student and they're going to get hundreds in every class. That's not reasonable for everyone. And from a parent's perspective, it's very important to understand and make those expectations reasonably achievable. You want it to be on the high end because you want to push them, but you don't want to be too high where it disassociates them with trying to achieve that goal. And so I feel like one of the most valuable things from a parent's perspective, or a parent's expectations perspective, is that it helps students find what they can achieve, even though they may not think about it at that moment. That to me is probably the absolute most valuable thing, at least, like I said, that I got from mine, and I hope my kids are getting from me.
Well, one thing I would just objectively step back and say, parents and kids don't necessarily have the same expectations or understanding of what they want. Usually a parent's expectations for a kid is based upon what the parents want for the kid. The kid has no idea what they want out of life, and that's normally the genesis for the parent saying, well, you don't understand how valuable this is. I need to provide this to you, or I need to make certain you're taking full advantage of this, right? Which all of a sudden becomes the problem if the kid themselves don't recognize the value or the need for what they're doing. But the parent is all of a sudden trying to reinforce with the kid that this is what you need to do. The best they can do is say, this is what you need to do because this is what I want you to do. The kid, again, has seen no different, knows no different. So it's a projection of somebody's expectations on somebody else and saying you should make those your expectations as well, when the kid might have completely other expectations or aspirations, I should say, right? At that point, parents have expectations, kids have aspirations.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And there may be a disconnect there between what they see and what they want, right? Parents say, well, I know that if you want to get a great job and have a stable career and be satisfied with where you are in life, financially taken care of and all that stuff, you need to go to college, or you need to make good grades, and you need to do this and you need to do that. And the kid is just like, well, I want to do the things that engage me, right? That keep me motivated towards whatever I want to accomplish. I have things that I want to accomplish. Right. And oftentimes the kid really does not know what they need to do in order to achieve those things they want to accomplish. But at the same time, they do recognize that, or they sometimes can't put the pieces together as to how I'm going to link what my parents want or expect of me to my aspirations or what I plan to do with my life. That type of thing. And oftentimes you see a disconnect. It's just like workers when you're trying to manage them, right? I tell my students in my management class all the time, right? Management, the difference between management and leadership is management's assembling resources, particularly human resources, and leadership is the ability to inspire and motivate people, right? But managers try to get the most out of their employees. And in order to do so, you have to inspire and motivate, right? Create some level. But employees, it's been shown employees perform higher on a longer term basis if they're engaged in what they're doing, right? that there has to be some kind of intrinsic need in them that's being met by the external circumstance, and that's the reason you're going to have engagement, and that's the reason you're going to have a high level of performance. Parents cannot create that for the student.
Yeah.
Parents cannot create that for the kid. The kid has their own internal needs, and if they aren't allowed to create an environment where those internal needs are met, that is to put themselves in the environment where, well, perhaps they need, a team environment. Perhaps they need somebody building them up. Perhaps they need a creative output. Perhaps it needs to be in their field of interest so that, whatever activities they're undertaking seem engaging, right? If they don't have that, then there's always going to be a disconnect. Everything's going to always be trudging uphill, right? So the trick there is to find the point where the kid's engaged. I would say my parents did an amazing job in terms of in high school when they had expectations for me. They weren't extreme, but they kind of let me figure out on my own what interests me, what engaged me. And luckily, I became engaged early enough in the expectations for myself that it all turned out extremely well, right? And it honestly met any expectation they could have ever had, if they did ever have any, right? But that's gonna be very difficult for parents to grasp, right? They just see their kids as needing guidance, when oftentimes, in my mind, it's the parent that needs to come to some level of realization that you can't just implant some level of understanding in your kids. You have to allow them to figure it out, and almost nothing you do is irreversible, right?
Sure.
And honestly, forcing someone down the path is probably going to have more negative consequences than it is positive, right? So anyway, that being said, right, I think that's why it necessitates the talk about what could be positive expectation, positive coming from parental expectations, and negative, and how that back and forth goes.
You bring up a good point. One of the things that kind of caught my attention, and really, it also kind of changed the way I viewed this question in a sense, is that you asked me what were my valuable, and then you came back and you said, okay, but if what I shared was to the extreme, then it could become detrimental. Essentially, that's what this is that when you have parents' expectations for students, if they're at the ideal level, if there's a balance, then they will inherently become valuable. But if it's too much skewed to the parent side, because we're talking about the student's life here, then it can become detrimental. And the thing that like I said, the thing that I realized is that we're talking about the parents' expectations, and it really has to do with the student's expectations of themselves. And if the student's expectation and the parent's expectation have some overlap, they're not completely on opposite ends of the spectrum, then you have a healthy balance, because you have enough on the upper side of the parent's expectations to push the student to get to that higher level that they know they can achieve. But you also have the flexibility on the lower side that it's not just, you're not going to have that instant pushback. It's not complete lack of autonomy, or they don't feel that. So that kind of balance is super important. Like the thing, my next point that I was going to bring up is, from a parent's perspective, when I look at my kids. So again, if you've never heard this episode, or if you've never heard this podcast before, this is the first one, welcome. But both of us are college professors. I'm right now working on getting my doctorate. My dad has his doctorate. Obviously it was a big thing for me growing up, because I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to teach school at some point, and looking at my kids, obviously there's nothing that would make me happier than them to kind of follow in some kind of path that I know will, in my mind, lead to some kind of successful career and successful life going forward, whatever that may be. But my son, who's 18, most people would think that I'm going to push him into some kind of 4-year institute, because that's what I went through. That's how I grew up. And he's not that person. He's not the person who's going to have a desk job. He's not going to be the person that is going to be running, with a, going on his career with a suit on or anything like that. He's somebody that likes to work with his hands. He is a tradesman. He is a prime example of a tradesman. He's outside all the time. He loves to build stuff. He loves to tinker with things. That's perfect for him. And so he's going to go to, I think he's planning on going to a community college or trade school here close, get a certificate or get something he's working on, and then he's going to go right into the workforce. And that's cool with me, because it's granted it's not where my expectation was in the very, very beginning, but I understand who he is. And so when it comes to the expectations, I think one of the things that parents tend to get wrong is that they should focus on the expectations of their student being happy. And if their student is happy, then that should make them happy. The problem is when you exactly. Sorry, use the term that we did in a previous episode. They're content. Okay. The problem is when you get too far to the extreme of that, and I think this is where a lot of parents start to that disconnect starts to occur, is that the parents forget about contentment. And they go into, my expectation is I want my student to do this so I can be proud. And proud comes from the success. Proud comes from the status of the position that they get, the status or the money that they make, the salaries that they're able to have, to where they can go out and say, my son or my daughter is this. And I don't think that is a good idea. But again, naturally, we look at success as financial success or status. And that's not always the case. And so I think it from a parent's perspective, it should be more about being content. And the expectation is my student, my child, will be content with the path that they're on, versus me worrying about what people are going to say about them being, X, Y, and Z, and not having the degree or having that that they're a CEO or they're their manager, whatever. No, it's just let them figure out what's going to make them content, and then support them. Be content with that. That's that's one of the valuables, and like I said, the extreme, which becomes detrimental.
And so it might be helpful to look a little bit at parents' expectations, because I've seen the gamut, right? Some parents just say, "I want my kid to be happy," right, and not or content, right? Like we said, I just want them to be content, and they're super supportive, and that normally turns out to be a healthy scenario, right? And they're doing whatever they can to support the kid. Now, when it becomes unhealthy is when they don't provide any source of motivation or that type of thing, right? They let the kid drop any level of, they don't instill the value of the result of hard work towards whatever you want, right? They don't reinforce, say, be what you want, right?
Yeah.
Be something though. Right? They don't instill the need to make money, right, to support your life. They don't instill all of the values in life that are all the benefits in life that come along with excelling in what you do. So having passion for something, I'd say that's the one error that goes awry on that end. Okay, not giving people a goal to shoot for means people don't even try.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
What I see a lot as well, and I've been intimately involved with this with people in my life, is an excessive involvement. Like and it's for what you see for a lot of people at the extreme is exactly what you said. The parents want them to be successful. They want them to be a doctor, right? They want them to have something to brag about, right? That my parents weren't like that, but my parents certainly did encourage. My brother thought he wanted to be a doctor initially, and they were extremely supportive and very proud of that and everything like that. And he ultimately took a different career, went into technology, right? And he's been successful. It's great, but it's not what they expected, and they were fine with that if he wanted to take a different turn, right? But parents, basically, a huge portion of the parents want to be able to brag about that status that they've achieved, or they want to brag about the money or something like that. One thing I saw with, some parents that were close to me early on, obviously not my parents, but those parents really just wanted to They didn't care as much about money and things like that because they came from money to a certain extent, right? So it wasn't the financial resources. It was they wanted to brag about what school they could get into,
Yeah.
right? They wanted them to go to your Ivy League schools or
Sure.
your high-end schools, or they wanted them to, in some way, excel academically. And honestly, what I saw there was a misplacement of value. They saw academic achievement
Hmm.
as the only real value for anything, and they failed to recognize that, grades really in so many ways, and this is funny coming from a professor, formal education and grades just in so many ways don't matter that much,
Yeah.
right? They just aren't. It doesn't correlate with success. It doesn't correlate with contentment or fulfillment. And to set these goals and not link them to what you hope to get out of it, right? What the student hopes to get out of it, I think is honestly the place where you get a lot of tension between the parents, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
I
if
agree.
you're going to set as your goal for your kid making good grades and you can't articulate exactly how that relates to your kid's dreams or aspirations, then honestly, you're setting yourself up for failure in terms of being a guide and a mentor to that kid.
Yeah.
So
I
anyway,
agree.
that's my take on it, right? All ends of the spectrum and the problems that come in there. So yeah, that,
So talking about this and with the parents' expectations and how an ideal amount, an ideal balance can be valuable, but then you have these extremes that can turn into detrimental attributes for the student. What are some ways that students can handle this relationship from their own perspective and then also from their parents' perspective? Like, what are some things that they can do to kind of maybe help the relationship?
in my mind, there has to be a continuous conversation, a continuous explanation from the parent to the kid and back again from the kid to the parent, where they demonstrate that why their head is in a certain place, why they're thinking about something. So the kid needs to reassure their parents, these are my dreams, these are my aspirations, this is what I plan to do to move forward with them. I'm not without a plan. Understand that I have something I'm working towards. Understand that I know the repercussions of my actions, and understand that I will make good decisions. That is the best that they can do to reassure the parents that, look, I'm a responsible human. Let me figure out my life. On the other side of the coin, the parents, they have to do the best they can of explaining to their students, one, or their kids, why we want these things for you. But also, I'm listening to you. Help me understand what you want out of life and the things you're going to work for. If you do, then that will help put my mind at ease that once again, maybe I can express myself better in explaining to you how I believe my expectations or my hopes or aspirations for you meet with what you ultimately want to do or be. I mean, what you just told me was a beautiful thing about you and your son. It appears that you have a mutual understanding of each other's expectations and aspirations for the other, which is absolutely incredible. Not many people, not many parents, not many parent kid relationships can say that they understand each other like that. And to see that is incredible. And that's the best I could honestly hope for anybody. If you're willing to listen, if you're willing to accept that somebody has an, a path, a goal, a understanding of who they want to be or what they want to become, rather than pushing on them your expectations, you're better able to accept their expectations, and then you can be the reinforcement in that way, right? You can help them in the ways that they actually need without you know creating an expectation for them. In my mind, that's where all the real value comes in. I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
So I don't think there is a better answer to how you handle this from both perspectives than communication. Like that line of communication, I think, is the most vital piece to everything, because it builds the bridge for balance. It builds the bridge for different aspects of the process. It really builds the bridge for the relationship in itself. The thing that I feel that comes out of, I think everything we really say outside of communication is just a feed off of communication, because it doesn't really come without communication. So to add more on top of that, I would say there's two kind of things that the mindsets that really need to happen. You got to kind of almost force yourself in this way. From a student's perspective, the word that came to mind was grace. And that is, as a student, you need to understand that the expectations, the way a parent views you is they see you in the best of light. They want the best for you. They see you the best. And that's just, it's natural. You're like my mom always said, you're my baby, and you will forever be that in my eyes. As a student, I have to understand all she wants is the best for me. And does that always mean that she's always going to be right? No. Does that mean she's perfect? No. Students need to understand that parents are not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes in their actions. They're going to make mistakes in expectations. They're going to make mistakes. It's just, my mom always told me, and I tell my kids this too, like, when you were born, you didn't come with a manual. Like, there was no how-to manual on how to parent. You kind of learn as you go. And you learn based on your history, how you were brought up. And through that process, it's not, there's no how-to manual, so it's a trial and error process, and there will be mistakes made. And there are times, and I've talked to students many times, where the expectation is so high because, again, they want the best, and sometimes they want that proud to be able to talk about it. But it's a mistake. And if you only see your parents as they are against me, then you're going to have more issues. But if you give them the grace of saying, I understand that they want the best for me, they just may not understand me, or they may not understand the situation I'm in, or they may not understand really what I want, my expectations. Then you start to open that door to say, okay, maybe there's something missing. And again, it opens the line of communication. You can bring that out and bring that up to them. Now, from the parent's perspective, that kind of goes along with this, is the understanding. To understand what I want for my child may not be what they want. My expectations may not be their expectations. My goals for them may not be their goals. What I see them as, or what I see them capable of doing, regardless of anything, regardless of their physical strength, their mental strength, or whatever, there is a level of realism that I have to accept. There are times when parents need to understand maybe their kid is not a 100% GPA student. Maybe they're going to have deficiencies somewhere. Maybe they're going to excel in other places. Like I said, my parents found out in high school, and they kind of understood that English is not going to be my strong suit. They managed their expectations when it came to my English grades. Now, did they want me to fail? They knew that I was completely capable of going through classes without failing. But they also understood that a reasonable expectation for English is probably not an A. It didn't happen. But math, on the other hand, I love math. They knew I love math. They knew I was more comfortable with math. Their expectations were a little bit higher. So there was an understanding of my skill. There was an understanding of my passion. And then there was a reasonable expectation that was set for me going forward. So I think for me, the best way to handle it is from the student side to have grace and understanding that, we as parents are not perfect. And then from the parent's perspective is to have the understanding that what I want, what they want may not be, exactly on par. And therefore, all of these things that I just said that's just more support on why you need a line of communication. You need to talk about this stuff. Like again, my son, it was never, you're going to go do this. Now, did I say that in the beginning? Yeah. I said, you need to go to 4-year college. And, talking to him, he's like, I don't want to do that because I like here, but I want to work with my hands. That's what I want to do. I said, okay, that makes sense. Now I've reconfigured my expectations. So now we started looking at what other avenues can we go to get what you want to do. And so that would be my how to handle it. Let me add one more, because this one came to mind too, that I think it's also very valuable from the parent's perspective. And this is not from for students who are listening to this going, well, this is what they said. This is, if there are parents out there listening to this is me speaking directly to you. And that is, if you're going to have high expectations for your students, then you better put in the work with your students as well. To me, that is one of those things that I can't stand, having to talk to students and go, well, my parents are forcing me to do this. They are expecting me to get straight A's. And then I ask, usually, because in accounting, finances come up, and they're taking student loans. And all I can think of is, if you're being forced to go to college, and it's definitely not what you want, and you have other plans, then somebody better be paying for it, because I'm not going to, I don't, that's extra expenses for me that I don't want to do. And if I'm not going to use the college education, then what's the point of it? Same thing with the grades. If you're going to have this high expectation, if your child comes to you and asks for help on something, you better be right there helping them, because their expectations should be your expectations. And that was something I can always count on my parents for. Granted, I got yelled at a lot because, when we were studying and he'd ask me questions and I would get it wrong over and over again, he'd get frustrated. But he sat there, both of them, my mom and dad, sat there and helped me study. I remember in undergrad, when I'd had to write papers, I would send them to my mom to read just to double check. And she was always there. She was never once had a problem with it, because her expectations of me lined up with what her expectations for herself was. So that is my suggestion from a parent to a parent, is if you're going to have those high expectations, you better be willing to put in the work too.
Sure. Absolutely. I think, I can't think of a better set of advice than that. So, bottom line, open line of communication. Expectations between two people are never the exact same. Understanding those expectations is as well as you can do. Keep the conversation going, so the understanding stays relevant, because that does evolve. Parents, you want the best, but also you have to recognize that they're independent people. Let them be who they're going to be. Let them make mistakes. Let them grow up. Students, understand that your parents have some level of experience. They can add value to your considerations because they've seen things that you might not recognize right now as being valuable, but it certainly is, right? The smart person learns from other people's mistakes.
Yep.
And take that in, factor it into your consideration. If you have a good reason for not following your parents' advice or guidance, explain that. Help them to understand why you don't want to follow it. And it has to be a back and forth, because the only reason parents do it is because they care, right? And if you don't have value in what you do, perhaps once again, your parents can aid you in understanding what you can be. They can provide that sense of motivation for why you should want to become something. Right? They have expectations for you that are valid and justified, because, once again, they are putting a lot of effort into raising you.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's good to understand their expectations for you.
I think it all boils down to one word. I really do, and it's to communicate. I mean, that's everything. None of what you just said can be accomplished without the communications. So this has been a interesting. I've really enjoyed this one. We got kind of deep into this one. I got a little passionate about this one. So, you got any parting words before we head out?
Just remind everybody, again, we're talking about the things you care about. So keep sending us those messages. We'll read them, and we'll answer them. We'll address them. We'll talk about them. We'll do what we can to the extent we have some input. So let us know.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.